Fabio for his complimentary slides as well.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So we are now into the asset management section of the conference, and we have George Stevenson of BIM for Housing talking about the impact on the new guidance on the golden thread of information. Over to you, George.
Thank you. Yeah, so why are we doing BIM? Well, largely it's the premise is that it's about quality, cost, improving program, and improving safety. But actually, in terms of quality, 3D modeling and VR hasn't really helped this couple. And one of the things that housing associations wake up every morning is the fear that something like this could happen. And what we're now doing is going through producing safety case reviews to identify where those risks are. And yet, even if we've done fully coordinated models, we're still getting this sort of quality of workmanship that is undermining things. And even the new clerk of works, when they're appointed, they can only pick up on things that they can actually see. So one of the challenges I think we have is Dame Judith was talking about a digital record, so transforming things into digital rather than analog things that we can see and pick up through normal sensors. And really, as far as housing associations are concerned, they've typically they've left the BIM side of things to the supply chain, but now they are involved. And they're looking to help them reduce their risk from a legal perspective. So what has been happening is there's a whole range of different processes and methods by which risk can be identified and probably more importantly transferred. And we've also got ways of looking at where the risks are in terms of information and putting in terms of processes to enable that, to identify what those steps are that can be put in place to change things. And also the reports that are needed to ensure that we can actually occupy the building afterwards. But really, what we're trying to do is to improve that quality of information. And what Judith was talking about was actually using BIM to get to us in a situation where we've got the same sort of traceability that we've got in aerospace and automotive. And the question then is, have we really solved it by using BIM? Well, the fact is that I don't think we have. When insurers are asking contractors, have we got the necessary data to prevent the spread of fire? I'm not sure that we can answer that question. Part of the work that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been working with a lot of big housing developers and their consultants and designers to actually figure out what actually is needed to enable this. And part of the challenge that we're trying to attack is that BIM extensively is used up till stage 4, but then it tends to drop off a cliff because the trade contractors get involved. And in most cases, the information that they are using is not in a form that would relate back to the BIM models. And it's not a matter of just them not doing the job. A lot of the things that they are capturing information on that we need from an asset management point of view are never modeled in the first place. So door closers, for example, or toilet seats, or functional spaces and the like. So this is information that isn't being managed, or it can't easily be referenced back to or built into a family or an object in the CAD system. And the result is that we end up having to commission surveys to go and survey buildings that have just been completed to find out the information that we need, which is mad, really. So although we've got a lot of processes in place to federate geometry, what we're not doing is really capturing the data. So the client ends up with information or doesn't get the information that they need. And importantly, isn't answering the question, do I have all the fire risk information on all relevant asset types? The only way of really doing that is to be explicit in terms of asking for what information you need. So the method that we're following now is to use the asset information requirements as the driver to specify exactly what informations we need, data that we need, and then to be able to audit it. So here we've got an example of one attempt at that. So we've got AIRs going out, which are quite comprehensive, but quite difficult to read and interpret. And as far as the fire is concerned, there's not a great deal of information there. It's just fire. What type of fire information do we actually need? This one's a little bit more specific, but still we're simply asking for fire rating. And what do we actually mean by fire rating? I've looked at the Building Smart Data Dictionary, and here we've got fire rating. There's 18 different references to fire rating. Which one do I use? There's 4 there that are just say fire rating. If it's a door, that's probably fairly clear in terms of the fire rating for a door, but what if it's a door set? And is that door is part of a facade? Is that any different? It's also, there's another fire rating there for a building element proxy, common, which I suspect is used quite a lot in models. Here we've got the IFC4 references, and we've got a number of different references to fire here. We've got fire rating, fire resistance rating. What's the difference? Surface spread of fire, I imagine that's quite an important one as well. If we look at a door, this is just a standard IFC door reference. We've got fire rating there. So we've been working with David Miller over the last 3 or 4 years to try and look at how we can pull this golden thread process together. And here we've got a specification. This has come from NBS Create. And you'll see here, they're not using fire rating as a reference, they're using fire integrity and fire insulation. I'm sure that there are architects and engineers on this call who would explain to me what the differences are with that, but it's not simple. And the other interesting thing with that is, although they've referenced 30 minutes there, they've now been advised that it's probably more sensible to take that 30 minutes out of the specification and just leave the reference to the British Standard. And therefore, the person that's trying to find out what the fire rating is of that door has to look at the fire strategy report and also the British Standard. So that may not be a good thing to do when you're in the middle of trying to sort something out in an emergency. So we think it's better if we can explicitly say what information we need, and that's really what the asset information requirements are about. If we can explicitly say it, then we can automatically validate and check to see if that information has been provided. We can provide product manufacturers with that information as well, so they can ensure that they're providing the data that's needed. And then as it's coming into the project model, we can then automatically generate it through into the digital O&M. It's a matter of using standardization to achieve a lot of that. So in this case, we've got a Revit model, and we've dropped into the Revit model a parameter. We're calling this the golden key. So this is the golden key to the golden thread. Basically, it's just a reference which then can go out to a schedule. And having that schedule, it means that we can generate, here's a UKBIMA data set, and here we can then see that reference back to the object and also the product that is satisfying it. By neutralizing that, not putting the manufacturer's information into the model, when that product might get swapped because of an issue during warranty period or in due course during the life of the job, it can get swapped as well. It also, you can then reference it back to the fire strategy. So when type A becomes a type G because it's a fire door, or a type F because it's a mechanically controlled door, you're not having changed things in the model. You're simply referencing it to the right type of product. And the manufacturer's information can then be kept up to date by the manufacturer. But we're not saying that that should be as a document. It might be as a document, but we need the key data to be held digitally. So the overall impact of that is that we've got the AIR is going into the specification tool, connected to the objects in the models, and importantly, we're trying to tie this into procurement. So we're bringing procurement into the BIM process so that we can automatically capture the information as it's needed. And then we can then grow that information through the overall process. Also change management. So if we start at the beginning by tying the requirement to a product that can satisfy that requirement, we then feed that into the design process, and we can then feed that into procurement and the technical submittal process. And that then can go into delivery, installation and commissioning. So it's tying it in and adding value to the way the subcontractors need to work. So what we're doing really is doing the same with the data that we've been doing for years with the geometry. We're bringing together the data files into a federated database, and also providing trade contractors with simple tools to update their information as it becomes available. So we end up with a federated asset data set that automatically ties to the model. And therefore, once we've got all of that coordinated with the geometry and also the locations of items, we can then feed that out into whichever planned and preventative maintenance system is being used. But also, we can also have APIs into the various other data sets that are being used as well. So the idea is to create a complete network of data services. So where are we now? Well, part of the issue really is to make sure that we've got standardized libraries and standardized data sets. And there's a lot of work going on to by authorities to author the information so that we're all working and singing off the same hymn sheets. So as far as the clients are concerned, what we're doing is providing a means by which they can hold that information in standard data templates and library items which they can either have as private or community libraries, which then are used on projects. So when they're then used on projects, they'll get glued together and can supply the information out to whichever systems are being used. So here we've got an example of with the housing associations. They're collaborating at the moment to create a set of asset information requirements that can be published as a set of, and in this case, that Word document also, if we look over on the right-hand side there, you'll see that we've got the IFC definitions for smoke and fire exit and fire ratings. And how do we then capture that information? Well, if that's been specified, we can then feed that out into spreadsheets or online forms into a database so that the trade contractors know exactly what information they've got to provide. These are IFC configured data templates. So that information can then be captured in a form that makes it easy for them to work with. Or they can be pre-populated if we know what products have been used, and the product library information can come through from the manufacturer. Much of the information can be populated automatically. So where are we going with this now? Well, as far as the housing associations are concerned, what they're being asked for is to demonstrate that they're building safe. Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, you've got to make sure that you've got reliable asset data. You need to know where all the fire stopping is. You need to know that the fire dampers have been serviced recently and that they will act in the right way to contain any fire. But we also then need to probably run simulations to be able to run scenarios to see whether people can get out, and use machine learning to then support that. So these are some experiments that we've been doing with Graph to enable us to look at the interrelationships between spaces and the items that are protecting them. Here's another one where the libraries are being used to support the FMA initiative that's an Innovate UK project. So again, all of the information is being digitized, and then there's going to be the means by which a client can go on and order a building. They're able to go on and configure a building and then order it for assembly on site. And that can then be both assembled and disassembled in years to come in the most sustainable way. So overall, I think it's about collaboration to be able to take libraries from major clients and also then create community libraries that everybody can share, and then use those on projects so everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. And finally, this is the way we're taking BIM for housing. We're creating virtual working groups around a number of different topic areas, and we've got a team of lead team on each of those now. This is just starting, but the principle is that we're going to identify problems that we're trying to solve, identify what the impact of those problems are, so that we can use that to prioritize which problems we're going to address. And then there's going to be work streams. We're going to invite people to join with us to actually try and address that and arrive at solutions that we can then work with going forward. And that's me.
Great, thank you very much for that, George. Our next presentation is from Christine Gorsden of BIM for FM, talking about the original golden thread. So over to you, Christine.
Okay, just about to get my screen up for you. So, good afternoon. I'm Christine Gorsden. I chair the BIM for FM Communities Group. I'm also part of the BIM Communities leadership team. I actually wear a number of hats. I've got a strong background, particular to FM, PM and CM. However, I presently work within an academic guise. So what I'm providing for you today is very much the subjective perspective, an FM focus perspective. My intent is, because I'm not a practitioner, I am simply the promoter of best practice in numerous guises. So what I'm presenting to you is my subjective perspective of the golden thread. Anyone who's heard me present on previous occasions will have likely heard not dissimilar before, and having scanned those attendees, I can see there's a huge number of you out there with whom I'm already familiar. However, I'm not going to apologise to you in this regard, because my perception is, until that wider built environment has fully grasped the concept of the golden thread, I intend to continue to educate in this regard. There's someone speaking behind me. I'll continue. So we speak copiously as to the information model, and we talk in the same breath about that concept of collaboration. We tend to infer that the former leads to the latter. If we use the information model, we automatically have a collaborative working environment. And again, whilst this might be correct in many parts, I always beg that question. If we share a singular model and a document management system within a mix of parties, and quite frequently those parties might be located in different venues, sometimes equally in different time zones, does this truly equate to collaborative working? And again, consider this from a slightly wider perspective, and it's why I've given you that graphic of the RIBA Plan of Work 2020. The question I frequently pose to all comers is, what might be the most important stage? Undoubtedly, the longest stage is that in use stage, and you could likely make a case for any one of these stages being critical and the most important. However, perhaps there's still the inherent need to consider the requirements of the end user as part of the initial strategy. The concept to start with that aim in mind, and having listened to a number of the previous presenters, I'm aware it's a constant message that we are seeking to promote. Think about a typical project. There is no such thing as an average project. However, a typical project could be 2 years in planning, 2 years in design, and perchance 2 years in the delivery stage. Yet, how long in use? And to me, this is the true concept of collaborative working, to take the holistic perspective of the product, not simply the process. I'm fully aware numerous presenters today have referenced the government strategy. I know George has mentioned that previously, that need to progressively introduce the mandated use of a fully collaborative building information model, and the premise that all government projects would do so by 2016. We overly mention that government mandate of 2016. However, all too frequently, we forget that that 2011 strategy also said the need to align the interests between those who design and construct an asset and those who subsequently use this asset is equally important. And having just listened to Adrian's presentation prior to the asset management section, I know that again, that message is now being reiterated. This was the original concept of the golden thread, and notwithstanding, if we go back to the BISRIA concept of soft landings, let's not forget BISRIA has been suggesting exactly the same, effective 2008. And this is a premise I perceive all too frequently ignored, as our industry, our widest built environment, has frequently become subsumed by the software required to deliver that information model. So let's fast forward to 2018. And across that whole decade, BISRIA has continued to promote the concept of soft landings, in part reiterating, reinventing the same. It's now badged as 2018 government soft landings, particular to our public sector environment. George has just mentioned the Hackett report in much more detail, and likewise we're all fully aware the Hackett report, Building a Safer Future, has sought to reiterate the same, the need to provide a digital model of information. However, all that said, the focus still largely remains within the delivery stages. And for an excess of projects, my view is the cessation of the consideration of that information model all too frequently ceases upon handover of that product. It's taking that product further forward we need to subsequently address in more detail. I was a facilities manager within a world ahead of several of the iterations of technology. I am old enough to have managed facilities and estates ahead of the invention of much of today's technology. And I'm quite frustrated. I find the concept of end users still remains muddled. Likewise, end users who fail to understand and fully comprehend the advantages of the information model to enable that better and more efficient use of assets. We're in a very digital world right now, and the gaps in that understanding, as I say, continue to frustrate. All too frequently, and this is across our greater built environment, there still remains the concept of facilities management personnel as janitors or housekeepers. Facilities management doesn't always fall into that professional perspective for many people. Some still perceive FM as the outsourced call centre, or if considering estate or asset management, the focus is perhaps greater upon leases, lettings, and the financial deliverables. Likewise, there remains that muddled perception, as I previously mentioned, of the end users, that an information model simply revolves around software. I still hear end users who state to me, this is all far too complicated, it's far too costly, it requires specialist skill sets we don't have available within our team. Within that guise of the UKBIMA Alliance, BIM for FM is absolutely not about the promotion of facilities management nor asset management. Our intent is really simplistic, to highlight the beneficial use of that information model within the in-use stages of the asset life. It is simply the sharing and the promotion of best practice. And best practice has been extremely difficult to acquire. We've heard from some of the BIM 4 groups today, and I'm really pleased to see there's more and more best practice out there. It's difficult not to duplicate because there's still only minimal best practice to promote from the FM, the end user perspective. Likewise, I'm fully aware every asset differs. The advantages of the more efficient use cannot always be demonstrated by financial savings. And I'm frequently hit with the discussion comment that the true benefits of a more sustainable environment for both the end users as personnel and that tangible physical asset may require several more years' worth of data in order to better quantify those benefits. All of what I've said now has perhaps sounded overtly negative. However, there is progress, and each and every time I present this scenario, I perceive there's greater progress, greater evidence as to the active application of the information model. There's been substantive progress in a variety of guises, particular to infrastructure. I'm aware many of you have been speaking of this earlier today, and my intent will be to send you in the direction of perhaps BIM for Water, who've already presented, and BIM for Rail to further pursue their case studies. As BIM for FM, we previously sought to highlight best practice from a TfL perspective, particular to the Docklands Light Railway. So a growing number of case studies, particular to infrastructure. However, that application of information modelling specific to signal systems and pumps perhaps does not always resonate with our traditional asset manager. One area of excellent and ever expanding best practice has been within the university campus, the traditional university estate of a mix of building types, a mix of asset types, some quite traditional and aged, and many universities seeking to build new. The concept of the digital estate is growing. There are some really significant case studies from this world which have evolved. What I've chosen to name quite deliberately are cities as opposed to specific universities. I'm not seeking to single out one as better practice more than another, and there are more universities within each city that are growing in terms of case studies. For more detail as to the particular case studies, particular to the university estate, I very much suggest you seek out Hadil. She was one of the initiators of today's event, and I will say she is the most adept of chairs. She chairs BIM for Estates. But whilst we're talking of the academic environment, there is likewise another golden thread ongoing within that world of higher education, and my very much current world. and that is the progressive integration of both information modelling and soft landings as concepts within the curriculum. Building information modelling and soft landings are no longer perceived as specialist master's level subjects. They're no longer specific master's levels qualification, albeit there are degree programmes, master's degree programmes ongoing, but these subjects are now integral to degree level subjects, degree level studies at undergrad level. No longer do we simply avail the provision of skill sets, particularly for both CAD and Revit software, but from an academic perspective, we now deliver information modelling and soft landings as integral to process. And this is very much a focus in terms of the teaching of best practice, particular to collaborative working. So what we're seeking to do across both industry and academia with some fabulous case studies is to educate that new generation for whom the digital skill set is inherent. Concurrent, ensuring there's a wider understanding as to how one might apply this skill set. And there is the potential for numerous of our younger generations to pursue a very different career path within the built environment. At both of these levels, I perceive academic progress has been relatively rapid, and this bodes extremely well, the positive message. There are, and I need to say this, there are, however, some anomalies. Bizarrely, a number of those academics institutions who purport to teach as to the benefits of the information model as best practice, likewise soft landings, bizarrely fail to demonstrate the same when seeking to modernise their own university estate. So perhaps another trigger for thought therein. To continue with my educational theme and to provide you with my most current of case studies and a positive case study. Whilst we're talking now some 4 years after the delivery date of 2016 as was mandated by the government, all school projects to be delivered by the Department of Education, and I'm aware some of you out there will be fully aware of this and perhaps working on this initiative. All of these projects will seek to apply the principles of ISO 19650 and government soft landings, our original golden thread. With a typical delivery remit of somewhere near 250 projects per annum, and with values ranging between 3 and 15 million, you should note these are not necessarily substantive projects, and I think this is a real positive, particular to information modelling. It's not simply perceived as a concept for substantive projects. However, think of that educational environment. Projects which must frequently be delivered within an existing operational environment with extremely specific timeframes. And that's obviously notwithstanding the obvious constraints of financial and quality deliverables. The delivery of these particular projects is predominantly or are predominantly procured by virtue of a design and build basis and by virtue of framework agreements with a number of well-established T1 contractors. Again, they're not overly onerous. However, what was and has been overly onerous has been the process ahead of the implementation of both the information model and soft landings. In order to pursue this strategy by the Department for Education, there was a need to initiate the process in 2018. So this has taken some near on 2 years, and to devote internal client resources in the persuasion of best practice, to persuade end users within the client body as to the benefits. Most specifically, notwithstanding the advanced selling of these concepts to all and the educating of the pending end users, there was a continual reticence on the part of many within this client organisation to adopt the process. So the strategy the department adopted within was to adapt a series of 6 trial projects. We've doubtless heard similar from different government departments previously. And these trial projects were utilised to overtly demonstrate the benefits of the process and likewise that greater collaborative method of working. Part of the premise was to ensure end users became increasingly familiar with the model as handover approached, effectively upskilling from both a technical and from a knowledge base. Not surprisingly, and this will be not surprising to the majority of today's listeners, these end users were reasonably rapidly convinced as to the benefits: time saving, a less fraught handover, and a better understanding of the built asset were some of the concluding comments. However, the greatest influence, the greatest selling point to those end users, if you like, was in terms of their persuasion to use, was quite simply their perception to be quite simply involved at the earliest stage. Quite simply, their importance as end users sought to persuade them as to the importance of this process. It's intended as a BIM for FM group, as a hub, to further amplify and report and present this case study as BIM for FM virtual event later this year. Rather than me reporting to you as to the benefits to a major client, a major government client, the intent is our Department for Education representative will take centre stage in this regard. So to conclude, and this is my other pending positive, you've already heard today from David Churcher. Likely the latter quarter, the latter part of 2020, the delivery of the PAS 1192 documentation to ISO 19650 status. David's already spoken of those benefits, and many of you I know have already bought into this part of the process. To me, it's the eventual taking of centre stage of the operational stages of the process. And I'm ever confident that in this guise, we'll be reiterating the premise of an overall strategy which seeks to consider the end users from outset. As part of the BIM for FM Hub, and speaking on behalf of the BIM for FM Hub, we very much look forward to this delivery. Progress, yes, progress eventually, and that's my perception. Thank you for listening, and back to Craig.
Thank you very much for that, Christine. We're now going to have a panel Q&A, which I believe, let's just check questions. I think we've only got one question come in, which is for George. And it looked like you showed a slide of the UKBIMA field definitions, which were possibly screenshots from Excel. Were those part of a publication from BIM for Housing, and were they just reformatted definitions of the NBIMS 4.2 document? What is the purpose or thinking behind those, and are they publicly available?
They were actually from a project that was, I think it was a Peabody project. I'm not quite sure, actually, to be honest. I need to go back and look at that. But that's the standard output that we generate from the coordinated database. So we're complying with the that's been configured so it complies with the 1192 Part 4 convention, which is the British standard rather than the NBIMS. Does that answer your question? NBIMS is slightly different than the British standard.